Big news! The Bank of Canada decided to cut the interest rate again. And by now, you've probably heard that because word gets around quickly. But we are going to discuss the actual implications of that. Is it actually a good thing to see them cutting? There's a lot of things that we need to get into, but there was important stuff with the Bank of Canada language as well, what they were saying in their statements that we need to address. But then after that, we have another video about how Canadians are still worried about the economy, about jobs, and what that is doing in the polls, and what the predictions are as of now, who is going to be the next prime minister, because there's some interesting stuff that we need to talk about. Let's get into it.
The Bank of Canada announced another interest rate cut today, taking its policy interest to 4.5%. CBC's business reporter Scott Peterson has more on the central bank's decision and what it could mean for consumers.
Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem took a bit of a victory lap of sorts, saying that three main pillars of his economic policy are in fact working. One with the monetary policy, saying that it is working to relieve price pressures, and that we can read into all those 10 historic bank increases back starting 2022 to 5% overnight rate have in fact cooled the economy. It's stopped borrowing, household spending is down, all by design to slow the economy. The second pillar he pointed to, that the economy has room to grow without installing further inflation. That's good news as well. And the third, and this marks a bit of a departure by the Bank of Canada, that inflation and the health of the economy needs to be balanced. That's the first time.
Yes, okay, so very important stuff there. One thing that I found hilarious is these rate cuts the rate increases originally were being done to stop inflation and slow the economy. So when Justin Trudeau and Freeland bragged about how good the economy is doing, the economy has been going down intentionally. So for them to take credit, it's weird. But then on top of that, people forget whenever we're talking about rate cuts and rate increases, people think it's about the housing market, and it sort of is. And we'll get into a little bit more about that later. It's not about the actual price. The Bank of Canada mandate is the actual economy, making sure that the growth is there, and then managing inflation. So they don't actually care about the price of houses, but that does have to do with the economy, which we'll talk about that in a second.
Time he's talked about balance before, it's been solely focused on getting that inflation level down from decades highs to the 2.7% where it is now, the 2% being the comfort zone for the Bank of Canada. He believes we will arrive there by the end of next year. But as well, this marks a shift for the Bank of Canada in the sense that they're now paying attention to the health of the economy. We're seeing the unemployment rate rising, for example, and if the rates remain too high for too long, that would send the economy into a recession, a hard landing, if you will, and that's not what the Bank of Canada governor wants. Here he is in his own words.
This forecast reflects the opposing forces affecting inflation. The overall weakness in the economy is pulling inflation down. At the same time, price pressures in shelter and other services.
You heard it from the Bank of Canada themselves, weakness in the economy. So the next time that you see Trudeau and Freeland bragging about how good the economy is doing, keep in mind, this is all of our GDPs being hidden through mass immigration. It's the worst way to hide it, but consumer sales are down.
Are holding inflation up. We are increasingly confident that the ingredients to bring inflation back to target are in place.
Shelter costs with rent increases, mortgage increases for anybody having to refinance their mortgages are increasing much above where the Bank of Canada is comfortable with. But for now, saying that prices are in control, reducing the interest rate for a second time, and also hinting that, saying, quote, that it's reasonable to expect that we'll see more rate reductions in the future. And there's 3 more meetings by the Bank of Canada. So some good news today and potentially going forward for anyone with high mortgage costs and high debt levels in this country.
So good news is subjective. The reason being they're cutting rates because the economy is crashing. It's slowing down like we talked about in other videos. And something else I've mentioned in other videos too is a large part of the inflation is the actual housing costs itself, which means as they lower these rates, that naturally is going to bring down, I think 60% of the overall inflation number has to do overall with housing. So if they bring that down, that means, oh, the renewals are down and all of these numbers. So it's able to adjust on the inflation a little bit, especially when it comes to mortgage costs and some of these things. However, The concerns are they're cutting because of the consumer spending down, unemployment's up, job market is very slow. So to call it good news is one thing, but where the other major concern is, why I said housing is important for the Bank of Canada, but not for the reason that people think it is. People think it's the price of housing. That's not as important as what people have for liquid income that they're able to spend, right? Because if you face a mortgage renewal and your mortgage is $1,500 more a month, that means that's $1,500 that's being sucked out of the economy per month that person could, in theory, be spending. So that's why it's kind of a bigger deal. With that thing, not so much to do with the actual price of housing. This next video is really interesting, though. Get into a bit of the polling numbers, talk about Canadians being worried, what they're concerned about, and who potentially is going to be the next prime minister.
Home. The headlines tell us that the Trudeau Liberals are continuing to face a series of challenges. Recent polling data from Nanos Research showing record dissatisfaction with the federal government, feelings of pessimism towards Ottawa on the rise. Nick Nanos is founder and chief data scientist of Nanos Research. He joins us with more, and we are also back with Mark Weisman, the former CEO of the CPP-IB. Nick, it's great to have you with us since we are getting inundated by U.S. polling data on the road towards the American election. Give us an update on how Canadians feel about the situation in Ottawa right now.
Not very positive. The reality is when we ask Canadians, what emotions come to mind when they think of the government in Ottawa, about 7 out of every 10 have something negative to say. 40% would use words like pessimism to describe their emotions, another 29% anger. That pessimism number, John, is the highest that we've seen since 2018. And to be fair, 9% are optimistic when they think of the government in Ottawa, another 8% satisfied, 9% disinterested. But the key takeaway,
9% optimistic, couple nuts. But what I'd be interested to know is, where is this overall pessimism rating in the history of Canadian polls? Because I can't see a time where it'd be that much more pessimistic than now.
The way here is that pessimism, when people think of Ottawa, is on the upswing and is at a high that we haven't seen since 2018.
Hey, Nick, I have a question for you. We talk a lot about the economy and the importance of government policy as it relates to economic growth. Are Canadians really that interested in an economic plan, or what the economic plan for the country looks like, when they decide where to cast their vote, or does the economy fall further down in the list?
No, actually, the economy, meat and potatoes issues, to your question, are actually at the very top of the list. It's interesting. Every week we ask Canadians what their top national issue of concern. The 3 top issues of concern all relate to money. Inflation, which has been on the rise at around 16%. Housing, or worry about housing. Jobs, even higher taxes is up there. And those inflation, housing, and jobs, those 3 economic issues are more important than the environment right now. They're more important than healthcare. And you know what? In the past, healthcare has been at the top of the list, as has the environment. So we're seeing these meat and potatoes issues come to the top. And that's really what Canadians want to hear about from all of the federal party leaders.
Nick, at the end of the day,
I feel like healthcare and other, things around that is also, it's just going to be such a big topic moving forward, especially because a lot of the new immigrants we're bringing in, I found out, are 55 plus, which means they're going to need access to healthcare sooner, especially if we keep up with these numbers. So the fact that we have this aging population that's supposed to be being replaced right now, and we're replacing them with 55 plus year olds, not sure if that's the play, Justin.
we don't quite know when we'll see the next federal election in this country. Is there any way to quantify, since we have to consume so much of the political campaign south of the border, how that might influence how Canadians are thinking right now as well?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they'll feel a little better or worse depending on what happens. But the other key thing is that,
and that's true. I mean, you guys, I see your comments. So, a lot of people will comment about Trump and American politics and stuff like that in the comments. And the fact is, we're seeing a change, right? And that's going to affect our politics up here probably.
Whenever we see things happen in the United States, this happens in business, it happens in politics and stuff like that. A lot of times we're importing those things. And I think for a lot of Canadians, they're going to look at two things. First of all, the tone of the debate between the Democrats and the Republicans in the fight for the presidency. They're also going to look at what the issues are, because you know what? There are a lot of Americans who are worried about inflation and worried about jobs, even though the economy in the U.S. is really a positive outlier compared to a lot of other places. And
bit of cooked numbers. Things are slowing in the U.S. too.
So I think it is going to have an impact. Maybe we'll feel a little better, or perhaps we'll feel worse listening to the Americans.
Nick, another question for me. You talk about the influence of the U.S. On Canada. Of course, we've had a sitting president decide not to seek re-election over the weekend. Quite an extraordinary set of circumstances. How does that influence the mood of the electorate in Canada?
If it was decided by him.
And how does it play for our Prime Minister?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway that you put your finger on in terms of Biden stepping down is actually that incumbents are in trouble right now. We see, Joe Biden stepping down. We saw the
stepping down
incumbent government in the United Kingdom just get a massive, can we say on BNN, a spanking, massive spanking. And in France, we saw Emmanuel Macron, actually the president of France, receive a setback in the recent French elections. And I think that's the key takeaway, that across the board in a lot of major democracies and the big economies, incumbents are being punished because there's a certain level of anxiety. People are worried about the future. They're wondering, where are jobs going to come from? Where is prosperity going to come from? And I think the reality is that they see thin gruel and don't see a plan or a vision on that front. And as a result,
coincidentally, almost every government he mentioned is left-wing, although the British government, the government of England, was technically a Tory conservative government. It was not. It was fake. It was very fake. But the fact is, we've seen all of these incumbents are clearly taking these countries down the wrong path with their policies, which are coincidentally very similar. And they end up going, people are like, well, we're kind of done with this. We want to move on. We want to see what's next. And people want change because obviously what's being done by the Canadian government in the last 9 years is not the right direction.
So, if you're struggling to pay for the groceries, realistically, what do you have to lose by voting against an incumbent? And I think that's one of the things that the Liberals especially have to watch out for.
And since we are seeing a lot of elections around the world this year, before I let you go, Nick, just based on what the polls are saying and your experience in tracking the trends in Ottawa, what's your best guess right now on what happens when it comes to an election in this country next?
Well, the next election is going to be a change election. And right now, the person best positioned for that is Pierre Poilievre. He's up 15 points ahead of the Liberals, and he's been ahead 10 to 20 points since last August. It's coming on a year that he's had that advantage. Realistically, today, the election is his to lose.
Yep, a lot of people have been saying that for a while. It is Pierre's election to lose. I'm going to keep saying it until he, gets a little bit more aggressive with his language. I am a little skeptical. I want him to win, of course. Don't get mad at me. I want him to be the guy in charge next. But I've got my hesitations. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. You guys have made it this far in the video. You rock. Don't forget to like and subscribe and have a great rest of your day.